Right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We'll get started. Apologies, we're a couple of minutes late. We've had quite a busy day today, so we'll get straight onto the agenda. And item one is apologies. I have apologies from Councillor Holmes, Matthew Holmes. Any other apologies, please? No. Late items. There is one. Has it been circulated fully, Christine? Yeah. And you haven't had long to read it, and have you been briefed on the details, Lisa? No. In that case, then we haven't seen it for very long either, Lucy. So if we can try and get these late items, if they're necessary, quicker, that would be good.
So, would you like me to introduce it?
I'll start it off and then I'll ask for clarification on some things from you. I just want to summarise it basically in that our understanding of it is it's a paper requested by Councillor Kerr. It's in relation to a bus service number 35 which operates around Littleover. It's a call for service. I think it's not a supported service, but it's due to finish. And this report requests assistance to be able to preserve the service by, long story short, the council passporting the community funds raised to the bus company to maintain the service. So at that point, Lucy, if you want to introduce and talk to it in a bit more detail, then yes, carry on. Thank you.
Thank you. It's about 5 weeks ago that we heard this bus was going to disappear. It's been running quietly for probably about 15-20 years in various forms, and it's people who live in the Derby Homes properties on Breton Avenue are very reliant on it, as are people on Havenbolt Lane, which includes some sheltered housing from a social housing provider. And there are various other people along the route who have become regular travellers. It's been very poorly advertised, partly because various sections of the route are hail and ride, so they don't have formal bus stops on which people can put bus timetables. And as a result of that, its numbers haven't been large, but it links Littleover and Mickleover. It's the only service that links Littleover and Mickleover district centres, and it goes past 2 doctors' surgeries and the Royal Derby Hospital as well. So it's a useful service to get around the sort of westish side of Derby. When the bus company closed, we were inundated with people saying this bus is disappearing, and people were really concerned about it. We did a survey, and the report from the survey is included in the papers, talking to, is it not? No, it's referenced. It's referenced, okay, there is a copy. And it's, we spoke to nearly 200 people who were travelling on the bus in that particular week, and that was about 80 or 90% of the people who were travelling overall. There was large proportion of people who are travelling on gold cards, and they recognise that there isn't a mechanism actually for them to pay. But to be able to have a bus to travel on is a lot cheaper, even if they're paying a bit towards it, than getting a taxi. And for quite a lot of those people, the alternative would be a taxi. So there's a willingness in that community to pay something towards maintaining this bus service. And we've explored that further with key people. We've spoken to people who are regular travellers on the bus, and they have given us feedback from other travellers. And we think there is the appetite there to say, right, 2 things. One, we will ask the community to help self-fund this service because it'll be cheaper overall than the taxes that they would otherwise take. And secondly, we will ask for donations so that we've got an upfront sum of money in which people can, we can use to pump prime to start this. We've also contacted the main shops on the route, such as Tesco's, Iceland, the Co-op. We've spoken to Intu, we've spoken to the Royal Derby Hospital to see if there's any appetite within those, not just to provide funding, but also to promote it. Because if we can get more people travelling, more people making use of this service, we should be able to reduce the number of people taking taxis or using private cars in this area, which obviously helps our targets on air quality as well. It's a bit experimental. I don't know of anywhere else in the country that's done something like this. And it's been quite a challenge for officers to work out how this might be done. And I've been really appreciative of the work that's gone on from officers in numerous departments over the last week to be able to get this far. And I'm pleased the timing of Cabinet is so opportune. Thank you.
Right, so Lucy, the reason for such urgency is that the appropriate funds need to be transferred tomorrow?
We haven't collected the funds yet, so that's tomorrow morning's job. The formal paperwork, I think, has to go to the traffic commissioners tomorrow afternoon, and if it doesn't get there, then the bus will not run beyond Friday this week. So we need the funds in, we need the paperwork completed and gone to the traffic commissioners by Friday.
Okay, so
It's a tight timetable.
So that the costs then are around £1,000 for 3 weeks?
The figure that we've been given is £60 per day, 5 days a week. So that's just under £900 for 3 weeks. And that's what we're going to start with. We're going to get up to a minimum of £1,000 in a dedicated fund within the council's budget, with its accounts, which can then transfer through as needed, as called for by Notts and Derby. And I think it's on a de minimis arrangement, so at the end of each month, no? I think at the end of each month, Notts and Derby will say how much more funding they need to be able to get up to their minimum level of patronage, as it were. And so we pay in arrears, but we need to know there's some money there to pay them for.
Just to be perfectly clear, it's not coming out of council budgets, it goes into the council's account. And I have to say, I don't know how you're going to raise something like £16,000 a year for this service, but that's a matter for you if you think you can manage it. Other than that, I think I'll take views from the Cabinet first.
Just got a few questions. So in terms of the raising the funds and the council holding it, what happens if the funds aren't raised? I know it says that it will stop, but how much notice does it need to stop? Who's liable for the interim period between the notice being given? It's not very clear to me. I just want a bit of extra assurances there that we're not going to get landed as a council with a bill that we don't need to be landed with.
Yeah, if I can just confirm, there is a way for the service to give notice very quickly as long as they get the support from the local authority in order to do that. And within the memorandum of understanding, it'd be very clear that it's Notts and Derby's risk if they run the service on and they don't have the sufficient funds there, so the council won't be liable for any of that.
So effectively, we're a savings pot, and we'll hold the money. When they ask for it, we'll give it to them. But there's no liability for us at all.
That's my understanding. We're going to be a conduit for the money between the community and the bus company without any liability to the council or anything else. And Olive, you can speak.
Thank you, Chair. No, I was just going to reaffirm that recommendation 2.1 is pretty clear that the arrangement is subject to the satisfactory terms on the MOA being agreed between us and the operator, and the mandate clearly to officers is that there should be no liability to the council.
And the recommendation 2.3 makes it perfectly clear that the Cabinet are delegating the authority to the strategic directors, the per place and Cabinet member for communities, to just passport this money through. Any other questions?
More comments, Chair, to be honest. I think, this is obviously a vitally important bus service, and we should do everything we can to protect it, both to encourage people to use public transport from an environmental perspective, but also promoting independence amongst people within the community, as outlined in the report. Just a few comments, though. It's a pretty sad state of affairs, isn't it? We've got a subsidiary of Trent Barton who can't find £60 a day, a profit-making company who can't find that money to protect a service, presumably because it's not profit-generating. So just kind of flag that, one of Labour's commitments nationally, if we were in government, would be to enable local authorities to bring the buses back into public ownership. And that would surely give us better control over these routes and allow us to protect routes, even if they weren't profit generating, but because we believe that it was in the best interest of the people of the city to keep them going. So I'd say that. Also, I think this would be an excellent opportunity to use the Derby crowdfunding page that was set up by Labour when we were in power, the previous administration, and I encourage Lucy to use that as part of the process of trying to raise money. And I just, I think it's really great that this is on the agenda, and I suppose it's further evidence about, the power and the working together of the coalition, as was outlined by Councillor Ashburn last night, Executive Scrutiny, who made reference to now that we're in power, so a direct reference to the coalition that isn't the coalition. So good on you, Lucy, for using the power of your coalition to bring this to Cabinet.
Comments noted, Lisa. I'd be interested to hear your detailed proposals, how we would fund and manage to bring 5 different bus companies into public ownership in the city, but maybe that's one for later. When Jeremy came to a city to declare his policy in a city where it's absolutely not possible, but there you go, there lies another story. So, Cabinet, can we agree the recommendations as printed on this item? Thank you very much. Moving on then, receipt of petitions. We have no petitions. Identification of urgent items to which call-in will not apply. There are none. Declarations of interest? None. Minutes of the meeting held on the 13th of June. Can I just check that full council, Councillor Holmes raised an issue in relation to the minutes? But that was actually in relation to the minutes of the overview and scrutiny panel, wasn't it? And the noting of, which is a separate matter, isn't it, really? Yeah, okay. And that was dealt with at full council. Any other issues in relation to the minutes? Move. Okay. Matters recommendations from the Executive Scrutiny Board. There are 2 recommendations at various points. I'll deal with them when we get to each item, if that's all right. The rest, the Scrutiny Board noted. So I'm going to move on to 8, and we'll consider the recommendations of the Scrutiny Board at that point. So item 8 is the new primary school provision across the city and at Hackwood Farm. Who's going to present this for us, Christine? Do we know?
Thank you, Chair. A new housing development is proposed at Hackwood Farm, Michelova, for up to 700 dwellings. The development crosses both the city and the county boundary. Across the whole of the development, it is estimated that 196 primary school places will be generated. A 210 place, which would be a one form of entry, primary school is proposed from September 2019 to ensure there are sufficient school places. The proposal is for the school's catchment area to align directly with the new housing, serving pupils from both the city and county element of the new housing. The new school building will be funded by the developer through Section 106 funding, and the developer will provide the site. Under the current regulations, to open a new school, the council must seek proposals from potential sponsors to establish a free school. The process involves inviting proposals to open a new school by posting an advert and documentation on the council's website. Proposals are then evaluated by an assessment panel in line with the DfE procedures. Following an evaluation of bids, the council makes a recommendation to the Secretary of State on the preferred sponsor. The Secretary of State will take the local authority as preferred sponsor into consideration, but ultimately has the decision to appoint the sponsor directly. Local authorities are required to meet the initial revenue costs of the new school, and further work is continuing to establish the likely pre- and post-opening costs. Pre-opening costs are likely to be in relation to the appointment of a head teacher, teaching staff, and the admin capacity. Post-opening costs relate to the funding required to address diseconomies of scale until the school reaches full capacity. Would you like us to consider the recommendations from scrutiny now, or do you want to open it for questions, Chair?
I'll open it for comments initially, if you don't mind, from Cabinet first. Any thoughts, everyone? Lisa, at this point?
Just want to reference the recommendation from Executive Scrutiny Chair.
In that case, Lisa, shall we read those out and be clear so people know exactly what they are, yeah? Mm-hmm. The first one was to recommend that Council Cabinet approve the preferred sponsor following an evaluation of the proposals and prior to the submission to the Secretary of State. And the second one was to recommend that Council Cabinet retain responsibility for the approval of preferred sponsors in future competitions to establish new free schools. Those were the recommendations from scrutiny last night.
Thank you, Chair. So I think this is a brand new process for us as a local authority. We haven't been through this process before. And I think it would be fair to say diplomatically that as a city we've had issues with free schools in the past. And I think because of both of those things, mainly because it's a new process for us as a city, and it's not likely to be the last time we go through this process, if it being the first, that we should have more stringent political oversight of the recommendation to the DfE. So the process is that the authority makes a recommendation to the DfE makes a final decision. But by bringing that to, by leaving that in the hands of the cabinet member and officers, essentially that decision is being made behind closed doors. And with a decision of such significance, we believe very strongly that there should be political oversight in the first instance, but there also should be the opportunity for scrutiny of that decision, which obviously putting it on the cabinet agenda would do, because it would go to executive scrutiny, and that the details of the sponsor that's been chosen and why that sponsor has been chosen should be made in the public domain, or why that sponsor is being recommended. Apologies, because obviously the DfE make the final recommendation. Officers last night talked about timeframes and whether or not putting that process in place would enable the school to open within the time frame. And I understand this is a very tight timetable in terms of getting the school open by September 2019, but that shouldn't be an excuse for poor governance, and it shouldn't be an excuse for not being open and transparent. The public should be involved in this process and should have an opportunity to have their elected members scrutinise it. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Williams.
Thank you. Well, the reason why the council recommendation is to delegate authority to the strategic director in consultation with the cabinet member, myself, to approve the preferred sponsor for recommendation to the Secretary of State is because of the timeline. And it is all very, very tight. And to build another cabinet meeting into the forward plan at this point in the process would mean that school would not open by September 2019, and we would therefore have some major issues. In terms of the transparency of the procurement and evaluation process, it's open and based on detailed DfE guidance, and the bid documents will be publicly available. Whilst the recommendation will be made by the strategic director in consultation with the cabinet member, based on the outcome of the evaluation, at the end of the day, it is the DfE who will ultimately decide who will run the school. So on this recommendation, it would be my advice that the cabinet agree with the recommendation as outlined in 2.2.
So in relation to the two recommendations from our review and scrutiny last night...
That's the first one, not the second one.
That's the first one. Okay.
Do you want me,
Do you want to
Lisa
deal with...
hasn't talked on the second one yet. Do you want to Lisa
Did you want to talk on the second one?
Okay, well, on the, sorry. On the second one then, if I may, we've considered this since scrutiny, and actually we're quite happy to build this into any future plans for the opening of any free schools in Derby to make sure that it is within the timeline. So we accept that recommendation. So
we can accept, from your point of view, we can accept the second one, would not, prefer not to accept the first one. Can I just ask in relation, I'll come to you in a minute, Councillor Graves. One of the points was it would mean ineffective to hinder the possibility of scrutiny on this. It wouldn't come necessarily to exec scrutiny, but could the Children and Young People's Board choose to scrutinise that decision?
I think that there would be the same challenge building in the CYP scrutiny as there would the executive scrutiny and cabinet. What we could do, though, and we did talk about this last night, in terms, because I do agree with Councillor Eldred in relation to this being a new process for Derby. And one thing we did talk about last night at executive scrutiny is whether once we've gone through this process, we can bring something back to scrutiny just to learn from this new process that we're going through, which would include learning about how the evaluation process went and any lessons from that. And at that point, we could talk about the range of applications and the preferred sponsor that went forward. And that might be helpful just in terms of learning as a council. But I think there'll be the same challenge, Chair, in building in children's scrutiny into this process, given the imperative for the school to open in September 19. And although that seems, well, it doesn't seem that far away, actually, there's a lot of steps to go through to get to that point.
Can I just bring Councillor Graves indicated earlier, if you don't mind, please? Councillor Graves?
Thank you, Councillor Poulter. Yes, this was discussed at executive scrutiny last night, and the vote was actually fairly close. However, listening to the officer advice, I find it quite hard to understand how we cannot build something into this. You do not decide on a sponsor within a few days and then appoint them a few days later. It is a longer process than that. There is absolutely, in my view, and it's very difficult to argue why you cannot build that into the time frame. Just to bring the fact that who the sponsor is, it is a new process, and I think we really need to start as we mean to go on.
Okay, Councillor Skelton?
Thank you. Yes, the timetable does indeed look very tight, which is most unfortunate, but obviously I presume that's the Department of Education have set that timetable. It may not be deemed that there's enough time to go through formal scrutiny within council processes, but surely something by way of public meeting or something like that within the local community affected, surely that should be considered.
Okay, Councillor Williams to draw this to a conclusion.
Thank you. Like I said, we're quite happy for future ones to be built into the programme to make sure that whatever scrutiny people want to do is done effectively. On the first one, as I stated earlier, the timelines are strict, and it's exactly for the reason that it's not done overnight that the timelines are therefore tight. Therefore, my recommendations are still the same, that we accept the second recommendation, that we'll build that into the future process, and that we do, as Andy has said, learn any lessons that have got to be learned from this. But at the end of the day, it will go to DfE to make the ultimate decision.
Okay, so Cabinet, and in relation to the recommendations from corporate scrutiny, the recommendation is that we accept the second one. We note the first one and propose to do a lessons learned exercise after the process is completed. Those in favour? Okay, that's passed then. So we actually need to come back to the recommendations themselves. Bear with me. We're on item 6, 8. So, having had the discussion in relation to this, do we propose to move the recommendations 3.1, 3.2 and 3.3 as subject to... Sorry, 2. Oh, sorry, I'm getting the wrong one again. So, and there's an amendment, is there, in here? Item 8, and there's got the figure in paragraph 1.3 should read 196 students. So there's an error there. So it's 198 instead of 196 for minor detail, yeah? So recommendations 2.1, 2.2, 2.3 as printed, Cabinet. In favour? Okay, that's passed then.
Chair, sorry. I presume there's a 2.4, which is the second recommendation of executive scrutiny. Is that correct?
Yes, you're right, Councillor Graves. Actually, just for clarifications, what Cabinet should be agreeing is 2.1, 2.3 and 2.2 and the second half of the recommendations from corporate scrutiny last night in 2.3. Okay, we're clear on that? Okay, moving on then. Item 9 is in relation to Life Skills, Art, Culture, Leisure and Sport Grant funding recommendations.
Thank you, Chair. Just as a way of background, Derby is one of 12 opportunity areas. They're government policy and strategically aimed at improving social mobility in areas which have been deemed to be social mobility hotspots or cold spots. Cabinet previously agreed in October for Derby City Council to receive and account for the Opportunity Area Grant on behalf of the DFE and the Local Opportunity Area Board, and it's expected that all of the funding the Council receives from the DFE through this grant would be awarded to the Opportunity Area Programme and allocated in line with the recommendations from the Opportunity Area Board and the DFE in line with the public sector procurement rules. So in addition to the core opportunity area funding, which is £6 million over 3 years of the life of the programme, the City Council will also receive funding of up to £2.4 million for essential life skills and to allocate this in line with the recommendations from the Opportunity Area Board and the DFE. And this was previously agreed by Cabinet in October of last year. The purpose of the grant is to fund extracurricular activities aimed at children and young people aged 5 to 18 years. And it's in relation to a range of enrichment and out-of-school activities, particularly targeted to vulnerable children and vulnerable groups, which could include and would include children and young people eligible for free school meals, young people in alternative provision, looked after children, young carers and children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities. So the grant's split in 3 ways. There's small grants of up to £24,999 to providers working in conjunction with schools, £1 million into school budgets via pupil premium formula, and £1 million into a competitive grant to work with schools for activities across the city. So in relation to that last point, 4 grant applications were received and they were assessed by a panel, and Derby County Community Trust is a recommended successful applicant who is working on behalf of a consortium of arts, culture and sport providers in the city, and organisations within the partnership are listed at 4.3 of the report. At the point of the assessment, approximately 45 schools were also partners, and the grant will go out in tranches to encourage Derby County Community Trust and the consortium to sign up more schools. This will be performance managed very closely by the Opportunity Area Board in terms of the grant really impacting on as many children as possible, particularly those who are vulnerable, and that will be reported regularly into the board. So, subject to any questions, I would ask Cabinet to agree the recommendations outlined at 2.1 and 2.2.
Thank you, Andy. Just for clarity, the Corporate Scrutiny Board considered this and just simply noted the report. Councillor Williams indicated.
Thank you, Chair. This is actually quite unique in terms of the Derby County Community Trust working with the consortium. As you can see in 4.3, all the various partners there that they've pulled together, and I was quite excited by this in terms of it being really innovative, really thinking outside of the box, and actually is going to hopefully really touch a load of our children across the city. And again, as Andy said, it will be performance managed by the board and we'll be keeping a sharp eye on it. Thank you.
Any other? Yeah.
I just wanted to comment that this report is really great for the 1,800 young people it aims to work with, and it would definitely give us these young people a great opportunity to build themselves and their portfolio.
Thank you for that, and I think there's been recognition of these of the Derby Community Trust, of the value of the work that they've done already in the community. And I don't know if you had any direct experience, but I've seen some great work by them. Alan, Councillor Graves, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that rather than just note the report, it was completely supporting this report from the Executive Scrutiny. Thank you.
We'll turn to the recommendations then, unless there's any other comments. And we, so we'll be recommending them as printed at 2.1 and 2.2. In favour? Okay, that's passed then. So we move on to item 10, Food and Feed Law Enforcement Plan. Yes, Mike.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Each year the Council must produce a Food and Feed Law Enforcement Plan, and that's a requirement laid down on us by the Food Standards Agency. The plan sets out how the Council will discharge its responsibilities and details the demands on the service, the risk-based work programme that it will deliver on, and the resources available to deliver that required work. The plan's consistent with last year's plan and previous plans in its format, and has been made available on CMIS for Cabinet to peruse. Recommendation, Chair, is to adopt the Food and Feed Law Enforcement Plan for the administrative year 2018-19. Thank you.
Questions? Any input on this one? Just for the record then, the recommendation should read to adopt the Food and Feed Law Enforcement Plan for the administrative year 2018-2019. Can that be approved? Approved, thank you. So item 11 then is Health and Safety Law Enforcement Service Plan.
Yeah, me again,
Kate,
Chair.
thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Similar to the previous report, Council is required by the Health and Safety Executive to produce a plan that sets out how it will meet its obligations under national health and safety legislation. Plan details, again, the demands of the service, the work programmes and the resources available to deliver on that work. This plan explains how the Council will work over the coming year to ensure that the workplaces it regulates for health and safety are safe and comply with the law. Again, it's done primarily on a risk-based programme, but it also combines inspections or alternative types of intervention in lower risk premises. And this complements the government's lighter touch health and safety regime, which aims to focus enforcement activity on higher risk sites and more serious breaches of legislation. The plan meets all the requirements of the HSC's national priorities, and again it's consistent with last year's work plan and has been made available on CMIS. The recommendation, Chair, is to adopt the Health and Safety Law Enforcement Plan for the administrative year 2018 to 2019. Thank you.
So any comments, questions on this one, please? Sorry, yes, the executive scrutiny recommendation here was just to note the report. So just for clarity, the actual recommendation should read to adopt the Health and Safety Enforcement Service Plan for the administrative year 2018-19. Can that be agreed? Thank you. It's passed. Thank you. So, item 12 is the adoption of the Planning Obligation Supplementary Planning Document Review. Yes, Mr.
Thank you, Chair. This document sets out our schedule to help mitigate the impact of development and development schemes on the city. We know it as an SPD, a Supplementary Planning Document. Members may also know it as S106, Section 106, and that is the Act that it comes from. We have one already. We did it in 2008, and since then an awful lot of legislation has changed, and this brings it bang up to date. We've consulted on it. That began in November, and your report indicates the comments we received and how we have amended or our commentary on those comments received to take it forward. It has also been through a scrutiny's board, a cross-party working group have looked at it, and we've had an equalities impact assessment undertaken. Throughout its gestation, members have expressed to me when will a guide be produced, and we're looking at producing a guide once this is adopted to encompass how members can be involved in the process of Section 106 agreements and how we can spend the money to help mitigate the impact of those development schemes. Other than that, Chair, the recommendation is to approve the adoption of the SPD review and any minor changes to be delegated to myself and the Cabinet member. And we hope to publicise this as soon as possible. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Clark. For the record, the Overroom Scrutiny noted the report last night. So any comments? Yes, Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. Page 57, and I'm sure you'll note student accommodation on this, and it says 272 paragraph, where are we? There should be a bespoke approach. That's it, third paragraph. First paragraph, right, sorry. Yeah, sorry, 271. Therefore, a bespoke approach to obligations for student accommodation scheme is required. What is the bespoke approach?
Thank you, Chair. It does depend on the circumstances of each application, each site and its location. But I would say we are going to seek to mitigate the impact of those schemes wherever we can. So we're not going to lay down a rigid requirement, but we will be looking to make sure that those schemes, as they come forward, do not upset, or we help mitigate their impact on the locality. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Webb, was there some concern on that point from your point of view?
Well, it would be helpful in planning terms, particularly members who go before the planning committee or indeed local communities where student accommodation is one of the applications that predetermined approach or guidance is there for members or members of the public, so that they can frame their questions and comments accordingly.
Okay, Councillor Graves.
Thank you. Although we did note the report in scrutiny, there were a few discussions, and I'd just like to bring out two that I think are probably very important. One is the discussion around projected pupil numbers in applications for Section 106. The Council currently, as it says in the document, only calculates it based on factual information at the time, such as the census, whereas the County Council suggested that maybe we should be looking at it from projected numbers, and I just wondered whether we thought that was a short-sighted view. The other thing is that what I'd like to highlight is how there is a new way of looking at it for Section 106 in conjunction with members. We felt that was a very positive thing in the document.
Mr Clark, do you want to comment further on those?
We did discuss it last night, and the County Council clearly take their views based on the county-wide, which has lots of different scenarios, whereas we look at our actual numbers in conjunction with our education colleagues. So we have the finger on the pulse better, I think, because we know our particular situation rather than it being broad brush. Thank you, Chair.
On the issue of member involvement in 106 negotiations, it's a long-held thought of mine that members need the capability to have some input at an earlier point than the system currently allows, and Mr Clark and I have had discussions on this on a number of occasions, but from my point of view this supplementary planning document review can go forward, but on the proviso that we We've talked about this, sit down at the earliest opportunity to look at the guidance for members' involvement in 106 with a view to coming up with some way of members being able to have an input on the discussions prior to the heads of terms being signed. I think Mr Clark and I are clear about that, and we'll do that at the earliest possible opportunity. Any other comments on this particular one? Then, in that case, sorry, just on the bespoke approach for student accommodation. At the end of the day, Mr Clark, I assume that any controversy or any discussions or any issues on that could be brought to planning committee and be ruled on in due course?
Absolutely. I mean, I just noted down here that it depends what the facilities are that are being provided in the units and their mix, their numbers, their locations, city centre or close to the university. Everything goes into the melting pot, and we will come up with hopefully a bespoke approach, but it's agreed per each application. And eventually at planning committee, yes, Chair.
Okay, so then Cabinet, can we approve this recommendation to approve the adoption of the SPD review subject to a few minor alterations? Thank you, that's passed. Item 13 then is the medium-term financial strategy and council plan for 2019-20. Mr McClure.
Thank you, Chair. This report sets out a strategy for our medium-term financial plan and our council plan for the next 4 years, from 2019-20 to 2022-23. The strategy sets out a challenging overall budget position where we are forecasting a funding gap of around £23 million across the 4-year period, and importantly with a forecasted gap of around £12 million in the next financial year 2019-20, where the council needs to statutorily fix a balanced budget for that financial year. Chair, this is a significant shift in position since our previous budget and medium-term financial plan was agreed by Council in January 2018. And members may find Appendix 3 of the report a useful summary position showing the forecasted financial movements across the next 4 years from 2019-20. And that is a comparable movement compared to our base budget in 2018-19 financial year, the current financial year, which is a balanced budget of £218 million. The main areas of movement for the 12 million gap in 2019-20 are highlighted in paragraph 1.4 of the report on page 1. And these are linked to evolving pressures in our adults and children's social care services. Derby, like almost all, I would suggest, all other local unitary and upper tier authorities across the country are faced with very similar financial pressures in these areas. The second reason for the shift is or the third reason, when you take into account both children's and adults, is a previously agreed saving target linked to staffing efficiencies in 2018-19, and there was a further saving linked in 2019-20 to this saving that is now considered to not be deliverable in full, and that is based upon the performance against that savings target in the first quarter of the current financial year. And the final one in paragraph 1.4 is linked to a pressure whereby when we agreed the budget in January, the budget was set predicated upon a pay award at that time of 1%, and coincidentally the pay award was settled around about that same period at 2% for 2018-19. the budget recognised that there may be some movement in the pay award, and there was a sufficient reserve put in place to cover off that additional 1% pay award for 2018-19. But clearly we've got to make good that gap in full in 2019, because the reserve just covers it for that first financial year, 2018-19. What the report also sets out how we will move forward in the coming weeks and months to bring the budget into balance. It goes without saying, Chair, that our forecasts are forecasts. These will change over this period as more information becomes available and we start working up savings plans and take into account new evolving pressures over the coming weeks and months. There's a detailed timetable included in the report at Appendix 2, which shows the key milestone dates that we are setting ourselves across the next 6 or 7 months, where we need to be by when, with a final action of setting a balanced budget for 2019-20 by March 2019. There's a lot of contextual information included in the report, and that's both national context and local context, which has been taken into account and have impacted upon our forecasting. There's also reference to how we will be aligning budgets to our new council plan, and our new council plan will again evolve over the coming weeks and months, and that council plan will be a 4-year council plan, and also our capital programme priorities as they are worked up across the next few months. And finally, Chair, there's an important section in the report on how and when we will consult on our budget proposals with stakeholders later in this fiscal year. And in summary, there's 11 recommendations included in the report, and these are set out in paragraph 2. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. McClure. Can I just, at the outset, on behalf of the Cabinet, thank you and your staff for the prompt manner, the tight timescales you've had to produce this report. We as a Cabinet and a new administration felt it vital that we got to understand the full true position in relation to the Council's finances at the earliest opportunity, and we've managed to bring forward this strategy document at this time of the year as opposed to when it's previously been dealt with in November in a financial year. So we need to fully understand the position to be able to deal with it in a sensible and open and transparent manner. That said, the bottom line is not good. It's certainly not good compared to what was agreed in January, and we need to understand the differences there. And it's going to create, in addition to the £15 million problem we had with the A52, it means we've got to find an awful lot of money this year and in the following 3 years. And we need to absorb that, take that into consideration, make those savings, and then be able to consider our own priorities and manifesto pledges to the future for the benefit of the city. So, again, thank you for the work that you put into this. It's not an encouraging position, but we will deal with it in the appropriate manner. Comments, please? Lisa?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Don. And I think it was an excellent and robust debate on this item, executive scrutiny, last night. And I'd also like to thank the officers who were there, particularly Andy and Don, for their candid responses to the questions that were posed to you by elected members, and appreciate you being patient with us whilst we came to an understanding of what had happened. I think that process is really important, and I think it's really important that elected members and the public have a clear understanding of the council's finances, minus the political spin-free, you could call it. Which kind of leads me to say that I feel I have to address some political spin. The so-called black hole in the budget that was reported in the media, the allegations by the leader of the Conservatives that Labour were to blame for this, and that the new administration hadn't in fact inherited a balanced budget. These allegations are quite simply untrue and misleading. At the executive scrutiny meeting last night, the interim Section 151 officer confirmed that his predecessor had in effect signed off on the budget for 2018-19 and the future budget projections as balanced and affordable. This is a statutory duty of the 151 officer under Section 25 of the Local Government Act. He also confirmed that if a Section 151 officer is not satisfied with any financial proposals, then they have the ability to issue a Section 114 notice, as happened in Northamptonshire when the Tory council went bust. This, however, didn't happen in Derby, so it's clear that the statutory officer in post at the time, Don's predecessor, did not have concerns about the budget that was set by full council in January. In fact, what the current Section 151 officer confirmed is that the current estimated funding gap identified in the medium-term financial strategy relate to emerging pressures based on what has happened in the first quarter of this financial year, along with savings targets, as he said, now deemed unachievable, and well-publicised shortfalls in funding for core services. When asked if it was normal for fluctuations to appear in a year like this, the interim Section 151 officer, sorry Don, said it had been normal for the last 7 to 8 years. What he didn't say, but I can say, is if that's of course since 2010, when the Tory government came to power and the funding cuts to local government started. In Section 1.4 of the Cabinet report, the Section 151 officer outlines the main areas of pressure the Council will face in the next financial year, and he's spoken about these this evening. The first is the 4.9 million adult social care pressure. This pressure is a national problem, as our Director of People Services confirmed at the Executive Scrutiny meeting last night. For several years, the government has been promising a green paper to provide a sustainable solution to adult social care funding as people are living longer and demand increases. For services increase. This green paper hasn't materialised. The Improve Better Care Fund, a 3-year grant which tapers off and ends next year, was meant to provide a temporary fix to this problem. All we can hope is that the government publish this paper in September, the green paper, as they have now promised, before funding nationally for adult social care falls off a cliff. Labour has been raising these issues for years and lobbying government for additional funding. It shouldn't have come as a surprise to the new administration. There is also a predicted £4 million pressure in children's services. Again, as the Director of Children's Services confirmed at Executive Scrutiny, this pressure is a national problem and has certainly been well documented, both locally and nationally. Around 75% of local authorities overspent on their budgets last year as demand has increased. What has changed is that in January this year, when the budget was set, there was an assumption that the service would be able to contain these pressures, or as my colleague Councillor Russell put so eloquently, they would be able to consume their own smoke. Not a phrase I had heard before. However, in the first 3 months of this financial year, the numbers of vulnerable children needing support, children in care and children on child protection plans has increased dramatically, and it is now clear that it will not be possible to contain these pressures in the future. We have to make sure children in Derby are safe. And again, there simply isn't adequate central government funding to meet the increase in demand in children's services, and this needs to be addressed nationally as a matter of urgency. Staffing savings proposed by officers in the 2018-19 and 19-20 budgets have now been reported by officers as unachievable based on for various reasons. These include savings linked to managing underperformance, not filling vacant posts and reducing sickness absence. Finally, the 2% pay increase awarded to staff in 2018 had not been finalised in January when the budget was set. In fact, at that point, public sector pay had been frozen at 1% by the Tory government since 2010, meaning our workforce had been subject to significant pay cuts in real terms. We hoped that this cap would be lifted in order that our staff got the pay rise they deserved, and had actually allowed an extra 1% in reserves in case this happened, but could not have foreseen the government's decision. I think it is worth noting, Chair, Section 9.1 of the report, which references the clear new pressures of the Tory manifesto pledges, which will have to be taken into account in the budget process. These so far have not been specified, although I believe on a rough count there's about 56 of them in your manifesto. And they also have no cost attached to them. When can we expect this detail from the administration, Chair, and what will the financial implications of these be? The savings in the medium-term financial strategy are significant, and without a serious injection of cash from central government, services in Derby will continue to suffer the consequences of Tory austerity. So can I suggest, Chair, that you stop with the cheap political shots, stop misleading the public by blaming the previous administration, and target your efforts at the real culprits, your friends in central government and their ideologically driven programme of cuts and austerity. Maybe you could ask them for a fair deal for Derby. Councillor Porter, this strategy unfortunately represents the reality of local government finances since 2010, the reality of pressures emerging all the time as demand increases and resources go down. If you can't understand or manage that, then maybe you should step aside for somebody who does. We don't want to be another Northamptonshire.
Have you finished your little speech, Councillor Eldred? That's finished? Okay. Yes. Sorry. You're Ruth, yeah.
Didn't know whether you were looking behind me or at me. Right, well, as we're in the mood of political speeches, I'm going to make one as well. No, not too long. A couple of weeks ago, a number of us went, representing this council, to the LGA conference. I saw Councillor Poulter and Councillor Williams there. I didn't see anybody there from the Labour group at all. I don't know whether they did turn up. But there was two occasions when at plenary sessions the Labour shadow spokespeople were there, particularly talking about issues facing local government, and of course adult social care came up. And persistently they were asked the question from the audience and from the person moderating the debate, where are you going to get the money from? Flannel and more flannel was, and in fact it got so bad that the audience started jeering them. And I see Labour in Derby are just as good at listing the problems, but no good at actually giving any answers. So they basically have got no backbone to come out and say that what we need to do is actually have some more tax. As the Liberal Democrats have said, we need to have another penny on the pound in income tax and pay properly for adult social care collectively through taxation. End of. Get some courage.
Okay, yes, I did attend the conference, and the agenda on the conference was, it really had two items on it. It was adults and children and funding, and I think there's a national recognition of those as issues on a nationwide basis, and I'm sure they'll be dealt with by the government. In relation to your contribution, Councillor Eldred, I just wish you'd spoken to your actual mantra of no spin before you launched into a Tory cuts austerity speech that you went into. The bottom line is that I made a comment because Councillor Schenker, once we took administration, attempted to imply that he'd left at that point in May that there was a balanced budget. He was wrong. The Section 151 officer will confirm for me, I'm sure, that there's nothing that this administration's done or included in the strategy that has increased the black hole, as we call it, to £12 million for this year. This is what we inherited when we took control in May, and it's 12 point something million this year and £23 million overall. That said, I'm not going to make political speeches. That's the situation. We needed to understand that. We need to understand how we're going to deal with that, and in due course you will get full details of how we intend to deal with our own priorities and pledges in relation to what this city needs. So can I just confirm with Mr McClure that it's perfectly clear that there's nothing in this strategic document, financial mid-term plan, that has any bearing, is affected in any way, shape or form by this administration's involvement or plans to this point?
Chair, I think yes, that I can confirm that yes, that is the position. The headlines in paragraph 1.4, though, I would say are based upon more known factual information that we now have at hand 6 months on from when the budget was set in January, particularly in relation to known ongoing pressures for adult social care and now known pressures within the children's services areas.
Thank you, Mr McClure. But in relation to previously agreed potential savings, clearly the advice is that was unachievable. Is that right?
Chair, I'm sure at the time there was a lot of discussion and debate had gone into the budget setting process. For the record, I have no doubt that the previous Section 151 officer would have presented these figures from a professional integrity perspective, that the figures all added up and balanced. The main reason for the savings item included in this report that is now proven to be undeliverable, I'm sure was considered to be deliverable at that time. I would refer to the evidence in the first 3 months of this financial year. There is very little evidence in that 3-month period that that saving will be delivered. I suppose me coming in with a fresh pair of eyes looking at this saving, it wouldn't be the right thing for me to do to professionally advise the Cabinet, the Council, that that saving will be delivered. What we've been able to do in 18-19 is already mitigate the impact of that saving so that we will not have a problem with that saving in 18-19. We'll mitigate it, we'll balance the figure that was included in the budget. Having said that, the evidence is very clear that we will not permanently be able to use the original thinking to set a balanced budget if we did not look for other alternative means of savings compared to what we actually put in the budget in January.
Okay, thank you for that. And for the benefit of the public and all concerned, I think what we can as a Cabinet give is a reassurance that any future savings and efficiency recommendations will be realistic, achievable and meet the desired outcomes. So yes, Councillor Ralston.
Just in relation to the 12.33 million, the result of which are, as already highlighted, pressures that have now come to light, have been in the budget, etc., have got to the point we are where we are in terms of the figures. And I think what's important to note is that these pressures have been coming on year, and in my feeling is that the previous administration chose to hide behind Treasury management savings from the previous year, and rather than tackle the ongoing issues in relation to adults and children's, rather than tackling it head on. And I think that's something we as an administration do need to tackle and do need to press on. And rightly so, I understand that we are writing to relevant ministers about the pressures within the council, etc. And I think it's important to highlight that last year was no better than this year. It was just fortunately hidden behind the Treasury situation that was achieved.
Okay, thank you for that. And yes, we can confirm as an administration that, as was mentioned, we went to the LGA conference and made appropriate representations there on what was the focus of the conference. And we have written to various ministers in relation to the pressures, particularly in adults and children's services, and we will continue to lobby all agencies responsible here to acknowledge and deal with the pressures that are being felt nationally in relation to these two particular areas. Any other comments? Yes, Martin, briefly if you don't mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. For your indulgence, I shall keep it brief and constructive. I've been on the Cabinet for the last 6 years, and looking back over that time, I don't think there was a single year when pressures of this sort weren't coming through. Every single year, new pressures arise during the course of the year. Savings targets aren't met for whatever reason. And it's really the job of the administration to manage those changes as they happen. So I think it is absolutely right that you've highlighted Chair, but that's the reality of being in control of the local authority at this very difficult time when resources are so tight, and these pressures, particularly in adults and social care, are continuing. It's not specific to Derby, it's a national issue, as you've said, and I'm sure as we go through the year there will be yet more pressures arising and further savings which for many a good reason aren't able to be achieved. So it's a question of managing that as we go through the financial year, and I'm sure you and your cabinet will do that, Chair.
I accept that point, Councillor Rawson, but the one of the best ways of dealing with it is to make the savings targets achievable and realistic in the first place. So we're trying to keep those to a minimum. So I'll draw this to a conclusion. Is there any other comments at all? From the Scrutiny Board's point of view, obviously subject to long discussions, but they resolved to note the report in the end. Okay, so the recommendations are 2.1 through to 2.11 as printed. Can they be agreed? Thank you. Moving on then to item 14 is the Council scorecard for 18-19. Yeah, thank you, Christine.
Yes, Chair. This report presents the proposed basket of priority measures that will be monitored by Council Cabinet for this financial year. We refresh the scorecard on an annual basis to make sure that it reflects the latest priorities. The criteria we use for proposing these changes are shown in paragraph 1.3 of the summary. So that's whether the measure is linked to an area of significant budget pressure or income source, whether it reflects a demand for services. It might be that it's a key inspection, reputational or compliance risk area, or that the measure links to a commitment in the latest edition of the Council Plan or meets at least one of the above criteria. So we do this on an annual basis, and you can see that the measures that are proposed for removal are shown in paragraph 4.8 of the body of the report. In some cases, the changes are due to national definition changes, and others that they are being replaced for different measures. The additions are shown in paragraph 4.9, and you'll see that the full scorecard of 46 measures is set out in Appendix 2. We do continue to regularly review these, and we usually have a mid-term review around about the autumn time just to check whether we're happy with the targets as well as the measures. I wasn't proposing to go into any more detail. Obviously, we can answer questions, and the recommendations are set out in 2.1 to 2.4, Chair.
Thank you. For the record, Corporate Scrutiny reviewed and resolved to note this report. Any questions or comments? In that case, we'll put the recommendations as printed, 2.1 to 2.4. Can they be agreed? Agreed. Item 15 then is compliance with contract and financial procedure rules. Mr. McClure.
Thank you, Chair. We've got 11 recommendations this month, and I will briefly take you through the first 4 of the recommendations, and the last one, it's a bit of a double act. Andy will take you through the others. Chair, there's a lot of narrative behind the recommendations, but if I can take you straight through to paragraph 2.1, the first recommendation is for Cabinet to consider approving that the setting up of any appropriate earmark reserves be delegated to myself as the Section 151 officer in consultation with the relevant Cabinet member where that earmark reserve might sit. That is not an unusual request. This would not, it would only be moving reserves around within the accounts. It will not be authorising expenditure. It'll just be prudently moving reserves aligned to any more evolving pressures in the financial year. Do you just want us to go through them all, Chair, then take questions at the end? Okay. The second one is linked to the investigation that we've set away several weeks ago in relation to the A52 overspend position. In order to keep up to date with the audit plan, we are asking to approve the use of £39,000 worth from reserves to actually bring in some additional resource to keep the audit plan up to date. 2.3, the government, this is to, the government are introducing some funding that we can bid against to improve air quality by retrofitting buses with better technology, and what the recommendation is that we seek approval to bid for that funding. 2.4, this is asking for approval to spend up to £250,000 on an action to see and undertake a feasibility study on the new assembly rooms, on the option to see whether we can actually renew and reopen the assembly rooms. And the last one at 2.11 that I'll refer to, there is a further opportunity for grant funding from government through Homes England to support the development of a garden village in the city, which is within Derby. We've been fortunate enough to be delegated a potential garden village, and there is potential funding for up to £500,000 without any strings attached, I should say, Chair, and we're seeking approval that we make a bid for that funding.
Thank you, Chair. If I pick up 2.5 through to 2.10, so 2.5 is in relation to the procurement of a framework for the provision of targeted and tailored tuition for our children in care, which would be coordinated through our virtual school, who have responsibility for working with young people who are in care. And the framework will provide a whole range of ways in which we can provide that tailored and personalised support to children based on the targets in their plans. And it will be initially for 2 years with the option to extend for a further 24 months. The second, or 2.6, sorry, is in relation to use of reserves to put some additional capacity into our performance and intelligence team to assist the council in preparation for our next inspection, which we anticipate will take place towards the end of the calendar year or the very early part of 2019. And this will be a joint targeted area inspection, which will be focusing on the front door and services for children who have been assessed a bit risk through sexual abuse. This is about putting in additional resource to help us in our preparation for the inspection, which is probably our first major inspection since the single inspection framework we had in March of last year. 2.7 is in relation to the adult social care reserve and to identify or to allocate just over £2 million to deal with pressures that we've identified in relation to demographic growth, living wage, inflation due on the contracts where we buy care, and winter pressures, because we started that planning now for 2018-19. And then the remainder relate to the opportunity area grant awards. So there are two specific grants here that the Opportunity Area Board has recommended and has been agreed with the DFE. One is to Landau Academy School, which is a targeted student support programme, which is really about trying to minimise the in-year moves of students between different schools, particularly in years 10 and 11. And we have one that will be coordinated through the Benrose School, which is about family engagement, which is about really trying to work to engage families who might be harder to reach around improving attendance and student progression and attainment. So the grants are £377,500 to Benrose, and then £276,000 to Landau, and to delegate that authority to around the final terms and conditions of the grant to myself as the Strategic Director and to the Cabinet Member and to the Interim Strategic Director of Corporate Resources.
Thank you very much for that. Comments, questions, please, on this? No. Corporate scrutiny obviously noted and discussed this and resolved to note the report. In terms of recommendations, there is just one finer point in relation to recommendation 211. That should actually read Cabinet members for adults, health and housing, finance and procurement, governance and licensing. So with
So it's those words when taken out, so it also retains that.
okay. Do you want to explain that, Oliver, just for clarity?
Thank you, Chair. In essence, the effective words being taken out are those on line 3 in recommendation 2.1, the words starting with business and ending at the. So business, governance and regulatory and the.
No, business is out,
Okay.
regulatory is out, licensing is in.
Yeah. Just take those out and then replace them with that. Yeah. So, yeah, if we take out everything from business to the word there and replace those with...
those words I just spoke.
Correct, yes. So adult health and housing, finance, procurement, governance and licensing, and then it carries on Director of Corporate Resources as well, so it carries on that way.
Okay, so Councillor Eldred, yes?
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points. On 4.4, the 39,500, I just think the wording is wrong, Chair. Based on what you said at full council last week, it should be to support the initiation of an internal, independent, to a degree, investigation by internal audit. So I think there's a slight wording error in 4.4. That was the first comment I wanted to make. I'd just also it'd be helpful to get a breakdown of this. What does 39,500 get us in terms of a resource? How long is the investigation planned to carry on for? What is the breakdown of costs associated with that 39,500? So that was under 4.4. Under 4.11, with the greatest respect, there's been an awful lot of work done on feasibility studies around the assembly rooms over a number of years that have drawn certain conclusions that were quite clear and were presented by the previous administration. My concern around this £250,000 is that you're adding to a body of work that already exists and that there is no need to add to that body of work. And essentially, the suspicion would be that spending this money is politically motivated in order to get an answer that you want to get in terms of refurbishing the assembly rooms instead of doing what has been recommended, which is to knock it down and build a new one.
Yes, Councillor.
Well, talking about getting answers that you want, I recall when the Labour administration, as it was back then, decided they were going to shut Gate and swimming pool and knock it down. They said it was impossible to rebuild it because it would cost £3 million to do so. And that was, I think, on a feasibility study. The actual sum of money it took, 1.1 million to rebuild. So that says a lot about how the Labour Party do their feasibility studies.
In answer to your 2 points, Councillor Eldred, I think Cabinet are absolutely sure and confident that the need to put £39,000 into internal audit account to ensure that it's able to carry out its duties is an awful lot better than the council spending £1 million after wasting that after bad money in relation to the £15 million overspend. In relation to the assembly rooms, just for clarification, the reason this had to come to Cabinet was because there had been £500,000, that's twice as much, authorised by your administration in relation to doing exactly this in relation to knocking down and doing a new assembly rooms. This is exactly the type of work that you were going to spend £500,000 on, that we intend to spend £250,000 on to renew the assembly rooms. So it's actually a saving of £225,000 on your own spending recommendations. Thank you. Councillor Ralston, do you indicate?
Thank you, Councillor Poulter. No, I was just going to touch on the subject that you've raised there around the actual reduction in the cost of the feasibility works for the renewed assembly rooms, as opposed to the new build, in relation to heavily weighted consultations. I think it's clear that we were given a manifesto and a remit as the new administration based on the election results. Thank you.
So in relation to the recommendations, in relation to this, they are recommendations 2.1 through to 211. 211 as amended. Can we agree those? Okay, agreed, thank you. Moving on to item 16 then, about debt write-off. Yes, Mr McClure.
Thank you, Chair. In 2014, through our Derby Enterprise Growth Fund, we awarded 2 loans to the company referenced in the report, and subsequently the company referenced in the report actually went into liquidation. The council also loaned the company a further £500,000 in 2016. A condition of the loan agreements gave the council a first charge on the building, and when the company went into voluntary liquidation, this entitled us to become the owner of the building. The value of the building is actually £2 million less than the loan that we had outstanding at that time. So this report is asking Cabinet to in effect write off £2 million being the difference between the value of the building and our outstanding loan at that time within our accounts. Chairman, that's the gist of the recommendation. It's in effect an accounting adjustment that we need to put right in our accounts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr McClure. Just for clarity, for the public's benefit, this is a fund which I now chair the administration of. It's a fund for loans and grants to encourage business throughout the city. And the nature of the fund is that at such times funds and loans are made available to these businesses where they may not be in a position to get that funding from elsewhere. And the nature of that means that there is an element of risk in relation to these loans. The record actually of the Derby Economic Growth Fund is excellent in relation to an average of this type of scheme. We don't have too many that go by the wayside, but this was a long-standing one agreed by previous administration some while ago. It's gone wrong, and this is a consequence of it, but the fund is relatively healthy, and proceeds are, and is proceeding well. Is that an accurate summary, Mr McClure?
Yes, Chair, that is an accurate summary. There is always some risk attached to the nature of the business from the Derby Enterprise Growth Fund. Having said that, I've been to several meetings, and I'm absolutely satisfied that there is due diligence attached to every decision made by that board.
Okay, so to deal with recommendations from the Corporate Scrutiny Board, the first was to support the write-off of the balance of this particular loan. The second recommendation was to recommend that Council Cabinet refer loan arrangements in relation to the DGF to Audit and Accounts Committee to review processes and practices. Mr McClure, any thoughts on that?
Chair, my understanding is that the Audit and Accounts Committee have looked at the processes to the Derby Enterprise Growth Fund. Having said that, I'm not sure when that was, and I would have no issues at all of taking that back to the Audit and Accounts Committee. In my opinion, the processes are very robust, but if we get another independent confirmation or otherwise of that at the Audit and Accounts Committee, I would support that recommendation from the Scrutiny Board.
Councillor Alston.
As a member of Audit and Accounts in the previous year, this was brought as an additional sort of inquiry report, if you like. We looked into it and we did ask a number of questions to the then officer in charge. So yes, absolutely. Any point, any sort of report like this that is requested by Audit and Accounts should be supported to do that due diligence. I can never say that word. And scrutiny. Thank you.
Okay, I think Councillor Graves indicated first.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for listening to the resolution from the Executive Committee. However, from my perspective, one of the things that concerns me is the directors of the company seem to have escaped responsibility of the consequences of the liquidation. And I just hope that this is something that's not overlooked.
Councillor Rawson.
Thank you. Thank you. As Cabinet Member of the time, I'd like to record my thanks to the officers who worked hard at the time actually to resolve this when EPM did go into liquidation. If I draw your attention to 1.5, I think this is the important outcome. The capital value of the factory premises is less than the EPM loan that was outstanding, although rental due over the duration of a lease combined with the capital value may exceed the previous loan amount. So Mr McClure has described it as an accountancy necessary from that point of view. In effect, we've exchanged a loan for an asset, which is the factory, plus the rental due over a period of time. So I would expect, Chair, that the Council would recover the full amount of the loan over a period of time, and to be able to reinvest that into the enterprise growth fund. So in the circumstances it was quite difficult at the time when EPM went into liquidation, but the officers involved at the time I think really got the best deal for the council that was possible under those circumstances.
Okay, from my point of view, having taken over the chair of this board, it is a relatively open and scrutinisable process. It is, all these things are carefully considered. In relation to Councillor Graves' point, in respect to responsibility for directors and company, I think perhaps all of you are able to confirm that whenever this sort of scenario happens, all due diligence is carried out in relation to the responsibilities and liabilities of the directors in such cases.
Yes, Chair, that normally would. Yes, Chair, that normally would follow. It's also worth making the point that in terms of the ability to chase the directors, that's something which companies house themselves would have to initiate of their own volition. But certainly in the circumstances, I'm sure it's something which they've never had regard to at the appropriate time. If they haven't made that decision, then they would have their reasons why that's not happened as such.
Thank you. So in summing up, I think it's fair to say that this fund and its administration and its past history, it makes it clearly a very successful scheme, which we need to continue and we will work to continue with. So we just need to deal with the recommendations as a result. So recommendation one is to improve the write-off of the debt. And an added recommendation from Corporate Scrutiny Board that we can also accept. Is that okay, Cabinet? Thank you. And so that's agreed. I think that concludes the business of Cabinet tonight. Thank you all for your attendance, your patience, and been a long day, but good business. Thank you.